Last month, former kickboxer and self-appointed masculinity guru Andrew Tate was arrested in Romania for alleged human trafficking and sexual assault. Tate and his followers believe he is the victim of a conspiracy to silence him because he, quote, goes against the system. Tate has often referenced the 1999 film The Matrix, favorite of mine, in saying that The Matrix, a global network of tech platforms and governments, are out to get him and are behind the entire criminal investigation.
Tate's lawyer, Eugene Vidniak, distanced himself from his client's claims when asked about them in an interview last Thursday, saying, quote, I have a serious profession, and I didn't ask my client about this Matrix story because I think it is something on media platforms. The matter doesn't have anything to do with my activity as a lawyer. Joining us now to discuss is YouTuber Vaush. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here. How y'all doing?
We're doing all right. Look, we've talked about some of the charges in other segments today and over the course of the last couple of weeks since this happened. What's your read on Andrew Tate's fundamental appeal as someone who is more online? His lawyer might not be interested in what's happening on the internet, but the only reason any of us are talking about Andrew Tate is because he's able to establish himself in this community. So what do you make of his appeal?
Yeah, it's obviously not much of a legal defense, but that refuge and conspiracy is really popular with people caught in wrongdoing, you know? And it seems like the evidence against Tate, you know, at least from what we have now, is compelling. There's not much you can do except suggest that you're the victim of some grand conspiracy. Of course, there are conspiracies in the real world. Usually these are conspiracies that favor the wealthy and powerful. Tate is both wealthy and powerful. It's just funny that you would use what is essentially the language of the critique of power to suggest that you, somebody who lives in a mansion with, 32 cars, are somehow the victim of systemic bias. It's pretty silly.
I thought it was really interesting when he was describing his philosophy and that the car only has value to him because someone else would want it, and it's like the social competition or something between men, which gives like life its satisfaction. I thought it was very, very sad kind of way to go about your life, to like only want things if someone else would want them. It would only have any value or meaning to you. But obviously this has to resonate with a lot of people. I think a lot of young men, maybe those who envy the wealth that a Tate type figure has, or what appeared to be or seems to them his easy access to women. Why is that a winning message, and like what's the answer to that?
I think a lot of young men feel very anxious about what they imagine their role in society is. They don't have a good narrative for how they should behave. There's a kind of inconsistent juxtaposition between the values of what one might consider a modern and sort of a traditional guy. It's a difficult tightrope for a lot of them to walk. So sometimes they find refuge in like audacious or ridiculous archetypes of masculinity. For example, this Tate thing, this miserable idea that the only like worth you can get out of life is trying to impress other men with the stuff you spend money on, which in reality, this is like rat race ideology. Like enjoy nothing, just consume, buy, listen to the ads, whatever you're told to do it, because some guy next to you with a smaller car, is going to get jealous. Ridiculous. But this is, as destructive as it is an archetype. And I think people will fall back into these what they imagine to be kind of masculine traits if they feel that's the only way they can express their identity.
And there's a lot of that, too, that's wrapped up in this, right, the idea that, tech and it's alienating or something, and this is popular in a certain strain of conservative thinking that, we'd be much happier, on farms or ranches or something with more traditional lives and raising animals and having wives that don't work and that whole kind of thing. Now, these arguments that this would be better and it's so much better, it should almost be forced on everyone, is always coming from what I would describe as like the most online people of all, like the people that I don't believe, like you can't stop tweeting for 5 seconds, so how could you churn your own butter? But this is a kind of thinking that seems to be overlapping with a kind of conservatism that is a little bit different from old school kind of, 80s social conservative. It's interesting.
Is it?
Well, it's a little bit different.
You don't think that the rise of this kind of trad popularity is a
Well, it's socially conservative, but there are differences.
And a lot of women, we should say, are buying into it too. I mean, it seems to me that the social safety net has failed people in various ways and that they're looking for alternatives. And I think that's very understandable. They're responding to a really real material reality. You can't support a family.
There's never a wife's social safety net, though.
Well, the wife's social safety net was their husbands. Mm-hmm. You used to be able to support a family on one salary. The idea of being a stay-at-home mom didn't necessarily mean the kind of economic precarity that it means now. People lived closer to their families and in communities. And there are plenty of women who find that to be appealing as well, especially since sexual liberation for some women has meant that you are sexually liberated, you can have sex, but that you're not getting, you have lost out on the idea of the kind of traditional partnership and financial security that you got in yesteryear. Now, I think that that's a little bit of a warped version of the reality that neither situation is necessarily ideal, but it seems to be fundamentally the problem is that people don't have money. And the marriage contract was always fundamentally about financial security. And people are looking, it seems to me, for some substitute for that. And now that those relations have been broken down, I don't know. What do you make of all this, Vaush?
No. I mean, I agree. There's a reason why, the rise of Nazis in Germany followed the Great Depression. The undermining of the narrative of men as breadwinners has historically been used as a catalyst for reigniting other perceived avenues of expressing masculine identity. Unfortunately, sometimes in quite destructive ways. You talk about these trad identities. There's nothing trad about Andrew Tate. You put him up against, I don't know, John Wayne or any older archetype of masculinity. He looked like a clown. He prances about like, I think the early 2000s term would have been a metrosexual or something. There's not really anything like archetypically.
Let's not denounce metrosexual.
Oh, but hey, listen, I don't shame that. I'm just saying there's nothing fundamentally trad about it. My man built his money off of crypto, right? I mean, this is hardly like an archetypal return to the farmland. Speaking of, you ever churn butter? It's actually really difficult. There's a lot of stuff that's difficult about the rejection of modern sort of alienating elements of the social fabric that we live in. Social media, the rat race, the idea that you have to engage in conspicuous consumption in order to get ahead of other men. But these are all things he promotes. So there's an interesting inconsistency in this like trad lifestyle versus, okay, well, here's the actual stuff you have to do. You have to live in the city. You have to like trade the crypto. You have to spend all your time online. And ultimately, this dissonance, it's going to make men miserable. It is making men miserable.
Do you think
causes problems?
What about that criticism of social media, that it is so alienating or that it lends itself to some kind of rat race? Because obviously Briahna and I criticize a lot of social media policies and various things, but I think social media has improved my life, at least. I mean, I have a talk show that's only possible because of YouTube. I have interesting conversations with people because of social media. I'm much more connected to different people all over the world in different ways of life. I'm more connected to people who share my interests, that in communities and forums that I wouldn't have known anything about in an era without this level of internet connectivity, and that's true of a lot of the people we're describing who they themselves seem to think they're so miserable, but I think might have been pretty miserable just living on not having a kind of, or having a forced community, just the community of people you happen to have grown up around.
I think there's a lot of value to what social media offers us in finding niche communities and people you never could have found if you were limited to your own in real life community. I think the issue is, what people are driven to through dopamine drip feeds is not necessarily what's good for them in the long term. It's very easy to stay inside, make 20 friends off of Twitter or Discord or whatever, and talk with them fervently every hour of every day you're not working. But it can't really compare, I think, to the satisfaction of a good meal with a good friend in person. And the more people are driven to what's easy, the more they might be driven away from what's actually meaningfully satisfying. I think we can fix this by doing more to make the real life appealing. We have fairly unwalkable cities, unlivable urban environments that don't really appeal to people, and it's expensive to go out and hang out with people in real life. Whereas stuff online, it's almost always free, except for, I guess, like a game subscription or the internet subscription itself. We've made online life easy in a lot of ways, but not necessarily good. And that dissonance, I think, is growing increasingly alienating, especially I think for younger people, where this, the vulnerability to that dopamine drip feed is a lot greater, and it might be even more difficult to communicate interpersonally because young people are anxious and nervous in the best of days. Why make that situation worse by giving them an easier but ultimately less fulfilling way out?
Well, to bring this back to Andrew Tate just for a moment, on Saturday, Romanian authorities raided Tate's compound, confiscating about $4 million worth of luxury cars, 15 in total. You were asking for that number earlier, Robby, in addition to some expensive watches. You were saying earlier, Vaush, that this doesn't seem to be really a traditional kind of masculinity. It's about conspicuous consumption. And I made an argument there that I found compelling, that this is an effort to fill this void that's been created by, I think, a kind of material deficit that exists as people have fewer and fewer resources to create the kind of lives that we were taught we'd have when we grew up. But my question to you is this: why do you think it is that while there are a couple of people on the left who seem to be resources for men who are flailing in this way, people like ContraPoints have tried to use, their channel to help break people out of these kind of ideologies. Michael Brooks used to try to reach out to disaffected people who are moving rightward, young men in particular. But for the most part, it seems that these figures, the Jordan Petersons of the world, and others like Andrew Tate, do seem to be right-leaning. What do you think the left is failing to offer in terms of an alternative substitute to this kind of material void?
Well, I think here in the States, or maybe the West broadly, the left has a history, at least recently, of operating as an ideology to the benefit of the dispossessed, to speak to the interests of oppressed peoples, to talk about what they need, what they want, what they're suffering from. But recently, especially I think attributable to the rise of the internet, we've seen an increase in the popularity of a lot of left-leaning populist ideas. And I think it's time for us to understand that we aren't just some marginal niche ideology for people who might not be able to find representation elsewhere. We're a winning ideology. And winning ideologies have to provide narratives, stories, and answers to everyone. Everyone has to be a part of it. You can't have a victorious political movement which is composed entirely of a minority of the population, right? You need to get at everyone. I think the left could do a much better job of understanding, is in line with basic intersectional theory, that men are also in many ways victimized by standards that were created to benefit them. The idea that men should be breadwinners, for example, yes, may have economically privileged men for most of modern history. But right now, today, it also causes a lot of grief and woe. Ever read Death of a Salesman? It's not exactly an entirely one-sided social standard. And you can see this Andrew Tate thing, right? He said, and I believe he said this directly, he doesn't enjoy sex or food. The pleasure he gets from everything is just doing better than other men. It's, at the face of it, miserable. I can't imagine a more cursed existence than deriving all of your pleasure from outperforming other rich guys, who gets the next car faster. This is a 100% just a sort of mutated and hyperbolic expression of the warped standards that guys are sometimes held to or hold themselves to. If the left can't find better solutions, better answers, ways to assuage this narrative, give them a better road to walk down, then it's not surprising to me at all that other guys like Tate, who I don't think have men's best interests in mind, would swoop in and take advantage of that narrative to sell their own poison.
Do you think there'll be a tipping point? I'm thinking particularly of the fact that Candace Owens has come out very strongly saying she does not think Andrew Tate did it, which is a different thing from saying, I don't know, we'll see what the courts decide. She firmly is avowing that Andrew Tate is innocent of all of the things that he's been accused of. Do you think the right can take this too far and some of these figures can be so kind of aberrant? The things that you're saying about how they don't seem to enjoy sex. There are all of these memes, is having sex with a woman gay? Like there's these weird perversions of what it means to even be masculine. Yeah.
Really though? Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, ew, performing certain sex acts on a woman is gross. It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
The kind of sex acts that were portrayed in the
Martin Luther King Memorial. 100%. Good callback. But yeah.
God. Oh no. Okay. Yeah. That took me a second. Yeah. No. God, what a statue.
Of the profane.
What a testament to man's love for his wife.
But yeah, do you think that they're going too far? Is there going to be a backlash at some point?
There might be. The far right needs this because, the way Steve Bannon talked about how he used to approach people online, right? You target incel communities. The right benefits from young guys who are sexless and angry at women because historically, God, look back as far as industrialization's gone. That is like the bedrock of far-right populist movements. You get guys who are angry at their place in the world. They feel like society has failed them in some critical way, that we must return with a V instead of a U to tradition. And this pattern keeps repeating itself. There has to be a breaking point, though. Swear to God, the way some people are talking about Tate, I feel like if Epstein had branded himself as a right-wing culture warrior guy 6 months before he died in prison, that they would have been, the Matrix got him too. I don't know how much of a limit there is to this exactly, but at the end of the day, there is a rubber band effect, and we do return, I think, fundamentally to some basic values regarding empathy, the humanity of women in particular, which I think is disregarded quite often by Tate and his fans. And if you pull that string too far, I mean, it will eventually snap. A movement like one supported by that ideology is completely unsustainable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go full Candace Owens here. I have urged a little bit of caution because I don't intrinsically trust what the police necessarily have said about the situation. What the police would say about any situation. There has been other things are routinely exaggerated by the police. They say there's some underlying criminality and it ends up being not quite that. I think the guy is certainly a creep, and the things he says are misogynistic. And I am absolutely. It would not surprise me to find him convicted of, or that there's sufficient evidence that he's guilty of at least sexual misconduct and possibly worse than that. I do believe in due process, and I'm waiting for more information about the situation, even though it looks sketchy to me.
Oh, for sure. I ain't no DA or anything. I'll just say, if ever you could imagine an ideology of a sex trafficker, you got that one nailed down right there. My man's laying out a bullet point. It's like an acting coach gave him, hey, can you act out a sex trafficker? How much can you hate women? I want to see, give me your war face. He's definitely got that all lined up. Obviously, you'll go where the evidence follows. We'll see how the investigation goes. Though it's worth noting, as a very wealthy and powerful man, that if ever there was any bias, it would generally be expected to be in his favor, not against him.
Yeah, it's worth noting that he says he moved to Romania particularly because they have weak rape laws.
Yeah.
So he's actively courting environments that are going to continue to invest him with privilege relative to his environment and relative to the women that he is interacting with. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
Could have gone to Somalia, I guess. Could have played it even safer, run off to Antarctica.
The bigger the gap economically, in particular, between you and the rest of society, the easier it is to buy off courts and get your way no matter what.
I know, but you guys share some skepticism with me, with the libertarian, of the police narrative is one thing.
I haven't heard a police narrative. They've charged him with a crime. I'm not reading a police report here. I'm reading Andrew Tate's own statement in his website about who he is and what he likes to do.
The question is how closely that's his persona, and maybe it is absolutely reflective of exactly what he was doing. Again, I am not defending him or ruling out that they convict him on exactly what they've said. I just, I don't know.
You were in it with him. I see. No, I'm sure it'll take years to work it all out. I believe some transcripts have come out of him essentially admitting to like tricking. It was doing the boyfriend method, right? This was something associated with some grooming gangs where you bring desperate women over and you're like, oh yeah, no, I love you, you're perfect, whatever. Hey, since you love me so much, how about you do a little something for me, some camming? You get them tattooed, you get them in a compound, take away their passport, kablamo. It's a pretty popular method. I mean, obviously, we just have early transcripts and some leaked messages to go off of.
And grooming has become the top agenda of conservatives to prevent everywhere. I'm hearing this term constantly.
And yet,
ostensibly,
missed a branding opportunity to call it grooming, I guess.
Well, many of the people who are anti-grooming are supportive of Andrew Tate. That's the issue. People like Candace Owens, who spent a lot of her program talking about licentiousness on the left and drag shows and how Kim Kardashian is a whore and all of this.
But don't you think a lot of that is BS?
What is BS?
Everyone is the grooming narrative that these all drag
I think it's
people
projection.
are.
I think it's.
So there is a lot of grooming going on.
Of course, there's sexual predation all over the place. Kids are getting molested all over the place. It's a horrible, sick, sad world. The question is, who is doing it, and why is there no interest in it when it's people's uncle, their family members, their close friends? That's who's normally the victim or the perpetrator. It's only an interest when we can pin it on Hillary Clinton in a pizza shop or Joe Biden. I mean, I understand there's political motives, but or drag performers or things like that. I mean, did you watch the Andrew? Well, I should ask you this, Vaush. Did you watch that the 1/6 documentary on HBO?
Oh yes, I did. Yeah.
And
the bit at the end, right?
Right. There's a guy who spends the whole movie talking about groomers and how much he hates them, and that's why he hates Biden and he loves Trump. And then there's like a reveal. I mean, it's out there. I'm not.
Oh, this is the one. Who's that guy? What's his
Andrew
name?
Callahan.
Oh, I saw you did a bunch of videos on him recently, didn't you?
Oh, he's in a little bit of hot water himself, but the bit at the end of that documentary. Just a smidge. But he did that documentary. The bit at the end, you got this QAnon guy screaming, everyone's a pedophile. This crossing guard's a pedophile. That bird's a pedophile. It turns out the man's a pedophile. 8-year-old, too. That was the victim. Not a ambiguous case for him.
Right.
You do see a lot of this. And there's a lot of rhetoric, too, that makes me feel like, they're really doubling down on that division. Matt Walsh, for instance, has said, the Catholic Church doesn't have a pedophile problem. It has a gay priest problem. If you take a look at the stats on where, like, child abuse and how it takes place or whatever, it's actually really easy to know what you can do about it, right? Sex education and that, like, Me Too kind of stuff. Believe, take seriously claims, listen to people, try not to let parents have, like, total, uncontested complete authority over children and their minds, because that environment can make it easy to abuse them. But conservatives advocate for that stuff. So, you got to be careful about where this all leads.
Well, I think conservatives are worried about teachers having exactly what you just described, the ability to instill in them values or norms contrary to what the families want.
Well,
only if they got a rainbow flag up on the wall. I ain't never heard any conservatives complain about teachers being domineering about any issue other than that they might support gay people or
I know we've heard complaints about liberal bias of teachers for forever, even predating the current panic over.
Yeah, but I think
there are bad teachers for sure, absolutely. Yeah. I just don't think that the logic of grooming, and real grooming, I don't mean like this fake, like grooming is when you teach somebody something. I mean like actual predation. That's got nothing to do with being gay or trans or whatever. It's a legitimate vulnerability when you have environments where there are people with power over people without. You've got people like Tate with a lot of money and power, of the ability to transport women around, take away their passports. You've got teachers around children and parents around their children. The consistent logic, the best way to fight all of this, I think, is the basic application of some feminist values concerning respect for bodily autonomy, the idea that you have to value consent, and a lookout for people who are engaging in predatory behavior. Tate makes money off of selling that predatory behavior to millions of teenage boys. The downstream effects of what he's taught people will end up having a far worse consequence than any sex trafficking charges they could pin on him. The total number of women abused will go far beyond whatever he has in his compound. That's what I'm mostly concerned about. It's the spread of that poison and what can be done to stop it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Vaush. We appreciate you spending so much time with us here today.
It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it, even though it's awfully early here on the West Coast.
All right. Hopefully you can get back into bed after this. We'll have more Rising for you next.